My name is Nora Jemison. I publish as N.K. Jemison. I am an author of fantasy, science fiction, horror, interstitial, short stories, novels, and other things. I have written a short story called The City Born Great. In that story, the city of New York comes to life. As all cities do. It's a natural process that just happens when a city becomes not just big enough, but complex enough and culturally rich enough and well-known enough, and if the legends about that city have spread far and wide enough. And when that city develops its own character to a certain degree, then it becomes a living thing, conscious, able to act on its own, but it needs a person as a kind of avatar. And that person in The City Born Great is a young man, homeless, black, queer, who discovers that he is the one meant to help the city go through this process of birth, becoming a living city. I dig more into the concept of what the city is like and the city's character and how that takes individual form in the novel that is based on the short story. The first of 3 novels that is based on the short story. The novel is called The City We Became, and it starts up almost immediately after the short story when the avatar of New York falls into an enchanted slumber. And it turns out that each of the boroughs, because they are distinctive enough, each of the boroughs of New York has its avatar as well. So there's actually 6 of them altogether. And so we dig more into, kind of what each borough is known for and its history and its character and things like that. I had my conception of what New York was like based on having lived here, but I also knew that my personal, very biased perception might not be what New York actually was. And so I ended up doing a lot of research, and my research was not of sort of a historic nature. What I was looking at was the city right now. What I was trying to do was make sure that my childhood growing up here and paying attention to like what the news chose to pay attention to was not a misinterpretation and misdepiction of what the city actually was. And I needed to understand who was really here. Because there's this perception of New York as nothing but white people, black people, some Latinos, and maybe a few Chinese folks. And that's just, it's never been that. American television, American film tells us that New York is predominantly white, mostly male, and some other demographic things that just really aren't true. And if I went strictly by demographics, New York would be female. New York would be highly multiracial, if you want to do it that way. New York probably wouldn't speak just English. New York would speak English, Spanish, possibly Mandarin or Cantonese. And New York would be good at sign language. New York would be able to ride bikes, but not to the degree that people think. New York might not be able to drive. These are all the kinds of things that I needed to understand. Generalizing is human nature. The way that our brains work is pattern recognition and interpretation of that. And it's perfectly natural and perfectly normal to take the limited data set that any individual human being is only capable of absorbing and make some assumptions based on that. It's just that you need to understand that that's not all there is, that what you as one of those 8 million people has happened to see and experience and feel is just the tiniest smidgen of what you're actually experiencing, of what is actually out there. And so you need to try and be open to those other many, many data sets. There is a tendency for certain sets of data to get lost unless you actually go looking for them. And in some cases, that's simply because they get lost in the great mass of the fat part of the bell curve, or it could be because there are reasons that people in power or people who have control of the narrative don't want to hear those particular stories. So it's important to go and seek out those narratives. It's important to try and make sure that you are capturing those quieter voices amid the louder gabble, because that's what a city is, end of day. It's not just one set of voices. And if you want to capture a city, you want to capture all of that. People who visualize data are artists. It's the same thing. When you are interpreting data as an artist, you're using your senses to interpret it. You're using your understanding of the world to interpret it. You're not using math or topography or other kinds of scientific tools. But at the end of the day, you're still interpreting a data set. And you're rendering that data set in a way that other people can hopefully engage with. Most of us don't use demographics. Most of us are using stereotypes or are using misconceptions based on media interpretations and so forth. What I tried to do in my fiction is, in some cases, engage with those stereotypes and question them, and maybe give readers a reason to question them themselves. We'll see if I did it well.